Something that should not exist may be the only reason the Strait of Hormuz has not fallen completely into chaos. Not a giant battleship, not some movie-style force field, not one magic weapon that shows up, saves the day, and disappears into classified darkness. What is stopping Iran's strikes in Hormuz right now looks a lot stranger than that. It is a layered, half-visible, constantly moving wall of surveillance, drones, helicopters, attack aircraft, and defensive tactics built to do one thing: make a narrow strip of water feel just dangerous enough for Iran to attack, but not dangerous enough for the world to completely abandon. And that is why this story matters. Because the real battle in Hormuz is no longer just about who can fire more missiles or launch more drones. It is about who can control fear in the most important oil choke point on Earth. Roughly a fifth of the world's oil and petroleum liquids consumption passes through the Strait of Hormuz, along with about a fifth of global LNG trade. So even partial disruption can hit prices, shipping, and the broader economy fast. That is the first thing people miss. The crisis does not begin when every ship stops moving. The crisis begins when movement no longer feels normal, when captains hesitate, when insurers flinch, when energy traders stop pricing oil like a normal commodity and start pricing it like a hostage with a timetable. And for weeks now, Iran has been trying to create exactly that effect, with drones, missiles, fast attack boats, mines, and the constant threat that the next transit through Hormuz might be the unlucky one. U.S. and allied officials have described Iran's main pressure tools as land-based missile systems, drones, fast boats, and underwater mines, while commercial shippers continue to avoid the strait unless they absolutely have to. But here is where the story turns. Because the United States and its partners did not answer with one clean, cinematic solution, they answered with something more unsettling and, in a way, more powerful. A system that makes Iran's attacks harder to land cleanly, harder to sustain, and harder to turn into a total commercial collapse. Reporting from the past 2 weeks describes low-flying American attack jets blasting Iranian naval vessels, Apache helicopters hunting armed boats and drones near the sea lanes, and a wider effort to reopen the strait and protect shipping. That is not a single shield. It is more like a moving trap spread across air, sea, and the invisible layer of sensors above both. And that is why I say, this thing should not exist. Because old wars had front lines. Old naval wars had fleets. Old blockades had obvious shapes. What is emerging in Hormuz is weirder. It is a defense web, a system where one platform watches, another identifies, another relays, another strikes, and another clears the lane behind it. The Wall Street Journal reported that the strait could become a testing ground for unmanned technology and AI in mine clearance after the U.S. gave up many of its legacy minesweepers. That means part of the fight in Hormuz is no longer just about ships versus ships. It is about machines hunting hazards before humans even get close enough to panic. That is the concrete shift. Iran is trying to fight a war of disruption. The U.S. is trying to fight a war of restoration. Iran wants every ship to feel exposed. The U.S. wants every ship owner to believe the lane is ugly but still survivable. And right in the middle of that is this strange modern shield that does not look like one thing because it is not one thing. It is surveillance plus speed plus layered response. It is low-flying jets suppressing threats before they can mass. It is helicopters turning swarms of fast boats from a tactic into a target set. It is unmanned tech turning mines from a permanent nightmare into a slower, more manageable one. It is the kind of system that does not make headlines, because nobody can point to one hero object and say, That's it. But sometimes, the most powerful weapon in a modern war is not the thing you can name. It is the network you can barely see. And that matters, because Iran's entire Hormuz strategy depends on psychology. Iran does not need to defeat the US Navy in a traditional sense. It does not need to sink every tanker. It does not need total closure every single day. It only needs to keep the lane feeling unstable enough that commerce never fully relaxes. That is the game. It is not winning the sea. It is infecting the market's imagination. That is why reports that some ships are still sneaking through the strait matter so much. If a trickle keeps moving, oil prices stay lower than a total blockade would imply. If the trickle dies, the fear premium gets bigger, faster, and nastier. That is your first hard framework. Hormuz is not open or closed. Hormuz is trusted or untrusted. That is the real battle. And right now, the reason total panic has not fully won may be this bizarre layered defense architecture that is stopping just enough Iranian pressure to keep a pulse alive in the artery. Now think about how dramatic that really is. A fifth of global oil moving through one narrow waterway. Iran trying to squeeze it with cheap, asymmetric tools. The US answering not with one giant, decisive move, but with a patchwork of aircraft, helicopters, surveillance, and unmanned systems, trying to hold open a corridor that experts still describe as brutally hard to secure. European leaders and military analysts have even warned that a full military reopening of the strait is unrealistic without broader diplomacy, while proposals have floated everything from sanctions to a future UN-led multinational security mission using layered defenses and surveillance technologies. That should tell you how serious this is. Even the people trying to keep Hormuz alive are not talking like this is easy. They are talking like this is a grinding contest of risk management, deterrence, and partial control. Which means the thing that shouldn't exist is not some invincible secret device. It is a temporary anti-chaos machine, built out of enough overlapping tools to stop the worst-case outcome without yet solving the underlying war. And that is why it feels so eerie. Because what is holding back disaster may be something the modern world has almost invented by accident. A semi-autonomous, sensor-heavy, layered battlefield ecosystem where human judgment and machine speed are fused tightly enough to buy time in a place where time is everything. That is the second hard framework. This is not peace. It is managed instability. And managed instability is one of the strangest states a great power can create. Everything still feels dangerous. Ships still hesitate. Prices still twitch. Diplomats still scramble. But collapse does not arrive, because the system in the background keeps knocking enough threats out of the sky, off the water, or out of the lane before they become a full economic stampede. US forces say they have already eliminated Iranian mine-laying boats near Hormuz, and the broader campaign has focused on suppressing drones, fast boats, and other maritime threats before they can dominate the choke point. Now let me give you the biggest mistake people make with stories like this. They think the dramatic part is the attack. It is not. The dramatic part is the gap between attack and collapse. Because that gap is where all the hidden machinery lives. That gap is where the helicopters move low over the water. That gap is where surveillance feeds are stitched together. That gap is where AI-assisted mine clearance starts sounding less like science fiction and more like economic necessity. That gap is where a global system desperately tries to prove it can still function while under deliberate pressure. And that is what makes this so gripping for an American audience. Not just the geopolitics, the mechanism. The idea that somewhere in one of the most dangerous waterways on Earth, The global economy may currently depend on a strange, invisible defense web that most people will never see, never understand, and never think about unless it fails. Because if it fails, everybody notices. Gas prices notice, shipping rates notice, airlines notice, food distribution notices, markets notice, and the average person notices when normal life gets more expensive all at once. That is why Hormuz is so terrifying. It turns geography into math faster than almost anything else on Earth. A drone launch in the Gulf can become a bigger fuel bill in America. A mine in the wrong place can become a global inflation scare. A fast boat sprinting toward a tanker can become a boardroom decision in Europe or Asia within hours. That is the compression effect of a choke point. Small space, giant consequences. Now here is the uncomfortable part. The system stopping Iran's strikes in Hormuz is real enough to matter, but not strong enough to make the danger disappear. Ships are still avoiding the area. Experts still say commercial traffic is unlikely to return to normal until there is a ceasefire or much stronger international security guarantees. The United States has even weighed more Marines, more warships, tanker escorts, and possibly seizing strategic ground around the waterway, which tells you the job is nowhere near done. That means this thing that shouldn't exist is not a happy ending. It is a holding action. A brilliant one, maybe. A necessary one, absolutely. But still a holding action. And that gives the story its real tension. Because if the web holds, the world gets time. Time for diplomacy. Time for markets to avoid full panic. Time for alternative routes, partial flows, and political pressure to do some of the work force alone cannot do. But if the web cracks, the next phase comes fast. Fewer ships, more fear, higher prices, harder choices. So what should you actually watch? 3 things. First, whether more ships keep sneaking through. If the trickle survives, the anti-chaos machine is still buying room. Second, whether Iran can still land visible, memorable, confidence-killing strikes despite the layered response. Because one burning tanker can undo a week of careful reassurance. Third, whether the response shifts from emergency patchwork to something more formal and multinational. Because that is the only version of this story that starts looking sustainable. Right now, officials are already discussing broader coalitions and surveillance-heavy security missions, which suggests even governments know the current arrangement is effective but fragile. And maybe that is the real ending here. Something that should not exist is not a secret weapon. It is a temporary answer to an impossible problem. How do you keep the world's oil throat open while missiles, drones, mines, and panic all compete for control of the same narrow waterway? Apparently, you build a ghost shield. A stitched-together machine of sensors, aircraft, helicopters, and unmanned systems. Not elegant, not permanent, not even fully visible, just real enough to stop total breakdown. For now.